This is the story of Kalen's ultimate betrayal. Stay tuned until the very end for the shocking conclusion. Kalen wasn't the kind of man who looked for trouble. He was a guy who believed in the value of a hard day's work and the sanctity of a promise. At 34, he'd spent the last decade working as a freelance architectural draftsman, staring at blueprints and dreaming of the day he could build something of his own. That dream finally took the shape of a two-story colonial in a quiet suburb of Pennsylvania. It had a wraparound porch, a yard big enough for a dog they didn't have yet, and a kitchen that his wife, Elena, claimed was to die for. When they signed the papers 6 months ago, Kalen felt like he'd finally arrived. He remembered the way Elena had squeezed his hand, her eyes bright with what he thought was shared triumph. Even his mother-in-law, Martha, had been surprisingly supportive. Martha was a sharp-edged woman who usually looked at Kalen as if he were a smudge on a window, but lately she had been all smiles. She even offered to stay with them, to help get the place in order. Kalen didn't mind. He wanted Elena to be happy. If having her mother around made the transition easier, he'd deal with the passive-aggressive comments about his choice of lawn fertilizer. The first few months were a blur of paint swatches and furniture deliveries. But as the new house smell began to fade, a different atmosphere settled over the home. It was subtle at first. Elena started taking longer to come home from her job at the real estate agency. She was buried in paperwork or grabbing drinks with a new client. When she was home, she was distant, her phone never leaving her hand. Whenever Kalen tried to bring it up, Martha was there to intercept. "Oh, Kalen, leave the poor girl alone," Martha would say, patting his arm with a hand that felt like cold paper. "She's working hard for this family. You should be more grateful." It made Kalen feel small, like he was a needy child rather than a husband. He began to doubt his own instincts. Maybe he was being paranoid. Maybe the stress of the mortgage was getting to him. To ease his mind and protect their investment, Kalen decided to install a high-end smart home security system. He wanted Elena to feel safe when he had to travel for site visits. He set up cameras at the front door, the back porch, and the garage. The footage uploaded directly to a private cloud server. Elena knew about the cameras, of course, but after the first week, they became part of the background. Just another set of gadgets in a house full of them. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. Kalen was 3 hours away in Pittsburgh, overseeing the framing of a new library. It was a cold, drizzly afternoon, and he was sitting in his truck eating a soggy sandwich when his phone buzzed. A motion alert from the front door. He expected to see the mailman, or perhaps a delivery driver. Instead, he saw a black SUV pull into his driveway, a car he didn't recognize. Kalen frowned, leaning closer to the screen. A man stepped out. He was younger than Kalen, dressed in a sharp overcoat, looking like he belonged in a GQ spread rather than a suburban driveway. He walked up to the front door with a sense of entitlement that made Kalen's stomach do a slow, sickening roll. Kalen waited for the man to knock. He waited for Elena or Martha to look through the sidelight and ask who it was. But the door opened before the man could even raise his hand. It was Martha. She was wearing her best floral blouse, the one she usually saved for church. But it wasn't her outfit that stopped Kalen's heart. It was her expression. She beamed at the stranger, a look of genuine affection that she had never once directed at Kalen. She reached out, took the man's hands, and pulled him into the warmth of the foyer. Kalen's thumb hovered over the speaker button, but he was frozen. Then, the audio picked up Martha's voice, clear as a bell through the high-definition microphone. "Come in, Sonny," she chirped, her voice dripping with honey. "She's upstairs waiting. I've made sure the coast is clear. That husband of hers won't be back until late tonight." The man laughed, a confident, jarring sound, and stepped inside. Martha closed the door and turned the deadbolt. The deadbolt Kalen had installed with his own hands to keep his family safe. The silence that followed in the truck was deafening. Kalen sat there, the half-eaten sandwich forgotten in his lap. The word "Sonny" echoed in his brain like a physical blow. Martha didn't have a son. She had only ever had Elena. The implication was a jagged blade, cutting through the years of trust, the shared dreams, and the financial sacrifices he'd made. He wasn't just being cheated on by his wife. He was being betrayed by the entire household he supported. Kalen didn't scream. He didn't throw his phone. Instead, a cold, heavy numbness washed over him. He felt like he was watching a movie of someone else's life. He opened the Cloud app and started scrolling back through the history. There it was, 2 days ago. The same SUV. Martha letting him in while Kalen was at the hardware store. Last Friday. The man leaving at 3 a.m. Martha waving him goodbye from the porch like a proud mother sending her boy off to school. It had been happening under his nose for weeks, maybe longer. They had turned his dream home into a playhouse for their lies. Kalen looked at his hands. They were shaking. He thought about driving back right then, bursting through the door and demanding answers. But he knew Martha. She was a master of gaslighting. She'd claim it was a cousin, a friend, a spiritual advisor. And Elena? Elena would cry. And Kalen, the simple guy who just wanted a happy life, would probably believe her because the alternative was too painful to bear. He couldn't just react. He stayed in his truck for an hour, watching the raindrops streak down the windshield. He felt the depression sinking in, a dark tide pulling him under. He thought about the mortgage, the debt, and the way he'd been played for a fool. He felt like a ghost in his own life. But then, the sadness started to shift. It curdled into a quiet, focused anger. He looked at the blueprints on his dashboard, plans for a structure designed to stand the test of time. He realized that his marriage was a faulty structure. It couldn't be repaired. It had to be demolished. He began to think about the house. He had bought it in his name before the wedding, using his inheritance and his savings. Martha lived there for free. Elena's name had been added to some of the utilities, but the deed was his. Kalen wiped his face and started his truck. He didn't head home. Not yet. He needed to talk to someone who dealt in facts, not feelings. He needed to see how deep the rot went before he started the demolition. As he drove through the rain, he watched the Sonny clip one more time. He watched Martha's treacherous smile. "Enjoy it while you can, Martha," he whispered to the empty cabin, "because the coast isn't nearly as clear as you think." Kalen didn't go home that night. He couldn't. The thought of stepping into that hallway, the very place where Martha had welcomed a stranger into his life with open arms, made his skin crawl. Instead, he pulled into a roadside motel, a place with flickering neon signs and thin walls. He sat on the edge of a sagging mattress, his laptop glowing in the dark. He spent the next 6 hours downloading every single clip from the cloud. He watched them with a clinical, detached sort of pain. He saw Elena laughing with the man, whose name he later discovered was Marcus, in his living room. He saw them drinking his expensive bourbon. He saw Martha sitting in the kitchen, casually reading a magazine while the two of them were upstairs. She wasn't just a witness. She was the lookout. The depression tried to swallow him again. He felt like a failure. He had worked so hard to provide a perfect life, only to realize he was just the bankroll for their secret one. But as the sun began to peek through the motel curtains, the simple guy Kalen used to be started to harden. He realized that if he acted on impulse, he'd lose everything. He needed to be as precise as the blueprints he drew for a living. The next morning, Kalen called a lawyer recommended by a guy he knew from the construction sites. Her name was Sarah, and she was known for being a shark in property law. When they met in her cramped, paper-filled office, Kalen showed her the footage. "I bought the house before the marriage," Kalen said, his voice steady but low. I used my inheritance. She's not on the deed. I want them out. Both of them." Sarah nodded, her eyes fixed on the screen, where Martha was calling Marcus Sonny. "In this state, since it's your premarital asset and you've only been married a short time, you have the upper hand. But we need to do this right. If you kick them out tonight, she can claim domestic distress. We play the long game for 3 days. You go home. You act like nothing is wrong. We prepare the papers." Going home was the hardest thing Kaylin had ever done. When he walked through the door, Elena rushed to him, giving him a kiss that tasted like ashes. "How was Pittsburgh, honey?" she asked, her voice sweet and melodic. "Long," Kaylin replied, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Very long." Martha was in the kitchen, humming a tune. "Dinner's almost ready, Kaylin. You look tired. You really should take better care of yourself." Elena needs a man who can keep up. The insult hit differently now. He realized Martha had been devaluing him for years to justify her daughter's betrayal. For 3 days, Kaylin lived like a ghost. He ate their food, he slept on the edge of the bed, and he listened to them whisper in the hallways when they thought he was in the shower. He even saw Marcus's SUV drive past the house twice, checking if the coast was clear. The big event was scheduled for Friday night. Kaylin told Elena and Martha that he wanted to have a small thank you dinner for them. For making this house a home, he told them. He even invited Elena's boss and a few of their friends from the neighborhood. People Martha always wanted to impress. Elena was thrilled. She spent the day decorating, while Martha bragged about her daughter's perfect marriage to anyone who would listen. As the guests arrived, the atmosphere was festive. Kaylin was the perfect host, pouring drinks and making small talk. But inside, he felt like he was waiting for a fuse to burn down. "Before we eat," Kaylin said, standing in the center of the living room, "I have a little surprise. I've been working on a video montage of our first 6 months in this beautiful home. A tribute to the family happiness we've built here." Elena beamed. Martha wiped a fake tear from her eye. "Oh, Kaylin, how sweet of you," she cooed. Kaylin dimmed the lights and turned on the 75-inch television he'd bought for the Super Bowl. The video started with photos of them moving in. Smiling faces, boxes, the first meal on the floor. The guests awed and oohed. Then the music shifted. The upbeat acoustic guitar faded into silence. The screen flickered to the security footage from Tuesday. There was Martha opening the door. There was the audio, crisp and clear. "Come in, Sonny. She's upstairs waiting. That husband of hers won't be back until late." The room went deathly silent. Elena's glass slipped from her hand, shattering on the hardwood floor. Martha's face went from a smug smile to a ghostly, chalky white. The video continued, a fast-forwarded montage of Marcus entering and leaving the house over the past month. Martha laughing with him. Elena leaning into him on the very sofa the guests were currently sitting on. Kaylin turned the lights back on. He didn't look at the guests. He looked directly at Elena. "I thought we bought this house for family happiness too," Kaylin said, his voice strangely calm. "But I realized I was just paying the mortgage for your playground. And Martha, I hope Sonny has a big guest room for you." "Kaylin, I can explain," Elena started, her voice trembling. "You don't have to," Kaylin interrupted. He reached into his pocket and pulled out 2 sets of documents. He handed one to Elena and one to Martha. "These are your eviction notices. You have until tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. My lawyer is already on her way with a moving crew and a locksmith." Elena's boss stood up, looking incredibly uncomfortable. "I think we should go," he muttered to the other guests. Within 2 minutes, the house was empty of everyone except the 3 of them. The simple guy was gone. Kaylin didn't yell. He didn't cry. He simply walked to the front door and opened it. "The security system is updated," Kalen said. "If you're not out by 8, the police will be here to escort you. I've already moved your jewelry and the things you actually paid for into the garage." Martha finally found her voice, her face twisting into a mask of rage. "You can't do this. We're family." "No, Martha," Kalen said, looking her in the eye. "I was just the guy who bought the house. Sonny is your family. Go find him." That night, Kalen sat on the wraparound porch alone. He watched them scramble to pack their lives into suitcases. He watched them leave in the middle of the night, Elena sobbing and Martha cursing his name into the wind. As their car lights faded into the distance, Kalen took a deep breath of the cold night air. The house felt empty, but for the first time, it didn't feel heavy. He had lost the life he thought he had, but he had gained something much more valuable: the truth. He went inside, locked the door, and for the first time in a week, he slept soundly. In the end, Kalen learned that a house is built with wood and stone, but a home is built on trust. When the foundation is rotten, sometimes the only way to move forward is to tear it all down and start over. He lost a wife, but he found his spine.